The PDP is disappointed in the outcome of yesterday's meeting, as it is our earnest desire to find a way to resolve the stalemate. Notwithstanding the turn of events, we now call on all 12 assemblymen to return to the negotiation table, this time with the inclusion of independent mediators. It is hoped that these individuals can quickly be identified by both parties in an effort to reconvene in short order. We believe that the current construct of the THA with the holdover Executive Council is undemocratic, and we must move swiftly to rectify it. Additionally, we are resolute that we should not miss this grand opportunity to work together to achieve autonomy for Tobago, so we can then return to the polls with a fresh mandate. The PDP requests that negotiations reconvene as early as 4 p.m. on Monday, the 22nd of March, 2021, in the chambers of the Assembly Legislature. And this release came from the PDP on Thursday after they met on Wednesday and were unable to come to an agreement about the way forward for the THA. The elections were held on the 25th of January, now almost 2 months later, and still haven't been able to come to an agreement about moving forward. We do welcome at this time political analyst right out of Tobago, Dr. Winford James, to weigh in on the 6-6 deadlock. Good morning to you, Dr. James.
Good morning, Ms. Nicole.
And how are you doing?
Trinidad and Tobago. Sorry?
How are you doing?
I'm strong and good.
Well, I'm definitely happy to hear that. What do you make of this, though? The PDP and the PNM met last Wednesday trying to come to an agreement on power sharing and were unable to do so.
Maybe we should have those negotiations taking place in full view of the public, rather than having 12 assemblymen determine, haggle and determine what should be adopted for the way forward. Right now, there is disagreement on a number of things. There's disagreement, for example, on the assignment of portfolios.
Yeah.
There's disagreement on who should appoint and who should not appoint. And that's one thing I would like to start off talking about. It appears from reports that the PNM is insisting that the chief secretary should appoint all secretaries. And the PDP is saying, but that can't be. How can you have the chief secretary appointing all the secretaries in the context that we are in? The chief secretary, if he's going to be fair, or she's going to be fair, must do so by agreement before the appointment process, because of the nature of the result, the stalemate, the impasse, whatever you want to call it. Because of that, you can't give the chief secretary sole discretion in this matter, because that would be behaving as if the PNM
had won the election,
has a majority.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to speak cautiously here. I haven't heard that the PNM deny what the PDP is claiming, and I believe I heard Mrs. Celestine say that, yes, we insist that the chief secretary must appoint. But appoint in what process? He didn't win an election. The PNM didn't win an election. There was a particular result, and that is why there must be agreement between the two groups with respect to the way forward. Now, you can have agreement and have that be legal once that is accepted, but it would have to reduce to a memorandum of understanding that this is what we have agreed to, and therefore you must follow this. And that is why there were these offers in the first place, that the PNM should have the chief secretaryship, should have the office of the presiding officer, those two in particular. And initially, of course, the PDP said, all right, we will settle for deputy chief secretary. We will settle for a deputy presiding officer. We will settle for, finance minister, finance secretary. PNM says, no, we want the finance ministry, the finance secretaryship, And so that is the kind of debate you must have. But the point is, you have to resolve differences, and how you go about resolving differences is not known to the public at this time. And this is why I said earlier on, maybe we should have the negotiations happening in the full gear of the public, so we can see how our representatives are acquitting themselves in a matter as highly important as this one is.
One of the things I've always battled with, Dr. James, is whether or not those 12 assemblymen should have been sworn in. Now, I know it was done according to law, but considering that the deadlock would not have given them, a clear majority, anybody a clear majority to take ownership or to take leadership of the THA, should they have been sworn in?
Yes, because that's the law. There's no getting around that. The law says that within a certain period of time, after the elections, you've got to swear in the assemblymen. And after you do that, then you've got to have the sworn-in assemblymen be convened in a meeting where the clerk of the House, sets about leading the process of the selection or the election of a presiding officer. Remember, that's where the problem started, that they could not agree on who should be presiding officer. They did it about 3 times, and the result was always the same. So they couldn't get to the point where a presiding officer was elected. Okay, they still haven't got to that point, and we know that there are some issues related to that. The PDP saying, for example, you've got to invoke the standing orders of the House of Assembly, and if those fail, you've got to go to the standing orders of the Parliament of the country. Those were the points at which we reached. Yeah, so to return, the assemblymen had to be sworn in. The president had no choice in this matter, right? But beyond the swearing in, you had to have a presiding officer elected, so that presiding officer now could preside over the election of a chief secretary, of a deputy chief secretary, of the other secretaries as appointed by the chief secretary. But that, of course, was in relation to one party having a majority of seats, which is not the case here. There is a tie, and therefore you have to horse trade, as the Americans, or is it the British say? You got to horse trade. And in horse trading, one side can't say, look, okay, so you gave me the chief secretaryship. You gave me the presiding office. You gave me the chief secretaryship. Now I will appoint in my own sole discretion the secretary. So what is the advantage in all of this to the PDP?
Right, but I mean, is the PDP in a position to be giving any portfolio? You're not in charge of them. How do you say, I am giving you X, Y, or Z, when we are supposed to be sitting equally at the table?
No, we are sitting equal at the table, and we are saying these are the offices that have to be divided up, okay? There are offices to be filled in this scenario of a party starting off with a majority of seats. That is no problem. If you had, for example, 7-5, the party with 7 would have been ruling today. Right. But they couldn't get to that point because they had 6-6. Of course, the law allows for, and I don't think that is indefinite, by the way, but the law allows for the previous executive to hold on until the new executive is properly seated. So it's not a question, if I understand you properly, it's not a question of the PDP not being in a position to demand this or to ask for this or to be given this. There is an equality of votes. And if there's an equality of votes, then there must be an equality of sharing to the extent you can work out what equality means in every case.
Yeah, but I
if
don't
you
think that's
allow,
possible,
if you allow
though, Dr.
one,
James, because
sorry?
no, I'm saying that I don't think that's possible because when you look at the executive council, it's going to host 9 people. And in 9 cannot be shared equally. It means that one person is definitely going to be having more sway
No, I
or
don't know where you got
more
9
seats
from,
within the
Natalie.
executive council.
Where did you get the figure 9
I
from?
asked the PDP and the PNM political leaders when I had them on the program last week.
Well, I don't know about the 9. I'm not talking about an equality of offices after you've gotten to the point where an executive is elected. What I'm saying is that you go into that situation with an equality of votes, 6-6, which means that you have to negotiate with respect to the assignment of portfolios. I don't know that we can speak equality in this context. We can speak reasonableness.
Right.
But I don't know we can speak equality. Because if you give, for example, the PNM the position of chief secretary, what is equal about that? It is an agreement you make that in the circumstances, we will give you the most important executive position, which is chief secretary. If the PDP gets the deputy secretaryship, what is equal about that? It is an agreement that you have reached to solve the stalemate. You say, okay, I concede for the good of the island that you should have that, okay? On whatever grounds. And I believe there was agreement up front that, yes, the PNM would accept the chief secretaryship and the PDP, the deputy chief secretaryship. And
Dr.
then,
James,
of course,
Sorry, we are out of time, but do you think it's going to come down to what the Prime Minister suggested, which is for the people of Tobago to go back to the polls in the medium term?
No, getting back to the polls has never been in doubt. That is not an insight from the Prime Minister. If you can't resolve the matter, clearly you have to go back to the polls. The question was whether when you go back to the polls, you would not achieve the same result. And therefore, how do you make sure that an impasse is not created the second time around? One doesn't know how people will vote, but it was a distinct possibility, still is, that you could return, the electorate can return a 6-6 result. Now, so the Prime Minister said, look, let's move from 12 to 15, right? Especially as 15 is a number recommended in the 2016-2018 autonomy bills. So we're going to pluck that out, and we are hoping that we won't have results of 3 sets of 5. Well, obviously, he must be thinking so, and that is why people talk about a prime number, like 13, where you can't have a tie. Now, so the Prime Minister is merely saying, look, we've got to go back to the polls, but certain things must be in place, and that's why he moved to his particular amendments. Now, there are issues with the amendments, and apparently I don't want to abuse my privilege here. You are saying that we have run out of time, Natalie, but there are issues in relation to the Prime Minister's amendment, which have been discussed by different panels of people across the country, especially those in Tobago.
Right. So what's going to happen if there are issues with the amendments? If we can't seem to agree on that power sharing arrangement, what's going to be happening with Tobago?
Well, the Prime Minister apparently feels that he's right and is going to force his way. He's going to say, I am the Prime Minister of the country. I held a cabinet which has authorized me to do this. By law, and he has received advice from senior counsel. We haven't seen that advice, but he has told us what the advice is, and he's going to use his understanding of his powers to force the EBC to get cracking on redrawing the boundaries, and of course, I'm setting an election date, and so on and so on and so on. So that is it. But the PDP, on the other hand, is saying, look, the law is sufficient as it stands. All you have to do is to invoke the secondary set of laws, if you wish, or the subordinate set of laws, which is to say that there are standing orders in the Parliament and in the Tobago Parliament, the Tobago Parliament and the Trinidad and Tobago Parliament, standing orders that say that the matter can be resolved by the casting of lots. Yes?
Yeah.
No. And then the PDP says, we are going to go to court on this matter. Let the court rule on this matter. In other words, there are two perspectives, and they differ one from the other. The PNM perspective with the amendments to the Tobago House of Assembly Act and so on, and of course the PDP perspective that we can solve this problem by drawing up of lots.
All right, Dr. James, we do have to leave it there, but thank you so much for speaking with us this morning. Dr. Winford James there. We take a break and we'll be back.